My family, they laughed. My friends, they laughed. They said, "You actually get paid to create mayhem." I'm like, "Yes, I do."
Welcome to the Shipping Podcast, where I meet interesting maritime professionals sharing their passion for the shipping industry and their everyday job. I am your host. My name is Lena Gothberg. Hello, Shipping Podcast listeners, and welcome to the 168th episode of the Shipping Podcast. If you are here for the first time and you want to make sure that you don't miss out on anything, follow the Shipping Podcast on your podcast platform of choice and become part of the tribe that gets to listen to new episodes as soon as they are released. In this episode, you will be meeting a Certified Master Exercise Practitioner, an MEP for short, an expert in incident management and risk assessment. Her name is Agneta Dahl, and she has a fascinating job, which she will explain. I'm so pleased to introduce a friend of mine, whom I have met through VISTA, the Women's International Shipping and Trading Association. I don't know how many times I've said this. If you are a woman in the maritime industry, find your national VISTA association and join as soon as possible. Go to vistainternational.com and look for the country where you live. It's a network for maritime business women that you just need to join. This is Agneta Dahl for you. I hope you will enjoy our conversation. Welcome to the Shipping Podcast. Could you please introduce yourself?
Good morning, Lena. My name is Agneta Dahl, and I am working for a company in Texas called NJ Resources.
And what is your background? I know you are from a very beautiful city.
Oh, yes, a very beautiful city. I agree. It's Göteborg, Sweden, where you happen to be living as well. My background is a little bit complicated, but I was born and raised in Sweden, moved to the US when I was 14, supposedly for 3 years due to my father's work with Volvo, but that ended up being extended and extended and extended. And eventually I became an adult in the United States and got established. And it just really ended up not being able to move home because I got busy here in the US. And after college and so on, I worked for a while in the science field. I worked in cancer and HIV research, opted out of medical school and went into research instead, and then found that that was actually not what I was meant to be doing, and had a complete 180 from the research world. I grew up on the Swedish West Coast, so the ocean and sailing and all of that was in me from birth. You know, I grew up with Jacques Cousteau as my hero, spent more time under the water than on top of the water. So I was either sailing or snorkeling, but never quite on the surface. So I joined the U.S. Coast Guard. By then I had become a U.S. citizen, so I was eligible for that. I joined the U.S. Coast Guard and went into the Marine Environmental Protection field, which is one of the missions of the U.S. Coast Guard. And I did a 22-year career with the Coast Guard, predominantly focused on marine environmental protection and also spill response and prevention. And I don't know how familiar you are with U.S. laws, but you've heard of the Exxon Valdez. And out of the Exxon Valdez came a law called OPA 90, the Oil Pollution Act of 1990. And that went into effect at just about the time that I entered the Coast Guard. So it was timing. And my life was OPA 90, and it was perfect. There were days where I couldn't believe that I was actually getting paid to do what I was doing. It was great. I loved my Coast Guard career. Excellent people that I worked with, wonderful opportunities. And I even did a tour in Sweden, which was great because I got to go home for 3 years. I worked at the World Maritime University in Malmö. So it wasn't quite home, but it was close enough. It was a 2.5-hour drive from home. So I was happy. And that was great because then I got to take what I was doing here in the US and apply it internationally, which was great. And it's nice to gain new perspectives for how other countries are dealing with pollution prevention from shipping, and also to be able to introduce other parts of the world to what we do here in the US, where we have adopted an incident management system called ICS, Incident Command System. It was, up until fairly recently, not used very widely across the world, but I was able to introduce the concept at WMU. I started teaching classes and courses in contingency planning and incident management. I worked with the Swedish government a little bit on that, and then I managed Baltic Masters project, where we had the full 14 Baltic nations involved with starting to plan for transboundary oil spill response. That's very different when you're working across international borders and every country has their own rules and regulations versus in the United States, where you have state regulations, but you have that overarching federal regulation that everybody has to be in compliance with. There's no equivalent in Europe of a federal, there's no EU standard acting like an overarching over all of them. So it's trickier. You have to find common ground. It's a kind of a diplomatic job, actually. It felt a little bit like a mini diplomat, but you absolutely, you can't force feed people things and say, well, this is the way you should do it, because it may not be the right way. It could be that certain countries have ways that are better than what I was thinking. And then we could just find, the gems. Everybody has their little gems and learnings, and we can combine all of that, and everybody can take advantage of it and come up with an approach that everybody can be happy with. So it was very interesting. From there, we came back to the US, here into the Great Pacific Northwest, which is very much like Scandinavia, actually. I feel very much at home here. And out of here, I retired. So I did 22 years with the Coast Guard. And then I started working for the company that I'm currently with, NJ Resources, which is based out of Houston, but I've always been based here in the Pacific Northwest. I don't work out of the Texas office. But even pre-pandemic, virtual offices work just fine. I can work anywhere in the world as long as I have an internet access. I'm good to go.
So more specific, I know that you're in the neighborhood of Seattle.
Yes, I am actually about 15 miles north of downtown Seattle. I'm on the north tip of Lake Washington, and in a little town called Kenmore. It's essentially a bedroom community to Seattle. It was an easy commute into the city.
And you travel a lot, pre-pandemic.
Yeah, well, in my previous life, before the pandemic, like everybody else, now I'm staying home. But yes, before I traveled a great deal. I love doing the international work. While I do have several clients that I support here in the United States, actually for the past few years, the majority of my work has been global, and it's been fantastic. So I primarily support oil and gas, and I support them with my family. They laugh. My friends, they laugh. They said, "You actually get paid to create mayhem." I'm like, yes, I do. It's like I build fake emergencies, fake incidents based on what they need. So it could be something happens to a ship, a collision, and you're holding fuel tanks or cargo tanks. It could be a subsea well blowout. It could be a pipeline rupture. It could be pretty much any kind of emergency you need it to be for your team. And we build it. And then we build all of the supporting documentation, all the facts that would have been available had this been real. So if your team would have sent up, say, a helicopter to fly over an oil spill, we have to be able to tell you, well, based on where you were flying, this is what your helicopter is seeing. And we give them all of the imagery. We generate satellite imagery. It's, of course, all fake, but we generate all of this fake but very realistic data to support a response. And then they have to, we always say, play it like it's real. Don't tell me, oh, in a real event, I would have done this. Well, do that. Take those actions, make those decisions, and then you will see the results of what those decisions, those actions are. So it's, a little bit of coaching of the reality versus the simulation. But once they get going, it works really well. And our job is to stress them to the point where it feels real, but not stress them to the point where they say, that's it, I'm done, I quit, because it's a learning. The whole thing is a learning process. And the whole point is for people to get good at incident management. The point is not to make people cry. So we stress them so they get a sense of how it would feel. But again, anything we create in a simulated environment will be nowhere near as stressful as if this was real, of course. But they get a little taste of what they can expect. And then they learn the process of how to manage an incident. And then also the difference between incident management and crisis management. They're actually two separate things. They happen simultaneously, but not done by the same teams. So we have the link between those teams. And not everybody exercises the crisis management portion at the same time. Some people do them separately, but often we exercise both together. But each client, each business unit, they all have their wishes for what they need to accomplish in any event. And then we build it to meet their needs. So every single thing it's customized, or it's bespoke to that particular event to meet their needs. And there's a whole process for this that is, you asked me before about the MEP, but Master Exercise Practitioner, that is what that is that whole process from start to finish. When you start building it, identifying the needs, developing, get the right partners into the design. A lot of times, if you're going to involve a government, you can't just show up one day and say, all right, government, we're going to exercise you now. You kind of need to have them in on the process up to the beginning to make sure they are in agreement. So you build the whole team. It's not just myself and some contractors and our client. It's everybody. It's the government representatives, the entities that have to respond. We have to make sure that everything is realistic and that everybody buys into what we're going to do. No surprises at the end, except for the actual responders.
I got so many questions now in my head. I'm thinking, what's the difference between incident and crisis exercises?
Well, it's more than semantics. It is, if you think of it like this, it's like, I don't want to use any particular event in the global world, but if you say an incident that's what just happened. I have my ship has a hole in it. I am spilling oil. That's the incident. That's what I'm focused on. Stop the oil, clean up. But how is that particular event going to affect what's the chain reaction, right? So from a company perspective, how is it going to affect my reputation? You have to manage that crisis because you don't want your company name to be mud. People saying, oh, you did a terrible job. You don't care about the environment. So, of course, that is part of the crisis, right? It's like our company is now in the foreground as being responsible for this spill. That's a bad thing. So it's almost like you have to go into, it's not marketing, but you have to preserve your brand, right? You have to protect the brand. And that's just realistic. So that will be going on, but the priority is stopping the incident and cleaning up the spill. And you have a team focused on that. That's your incident management team. They're dealing with that. Your crisis management team is dealing with all of these things that are fallouts from the original thing. So you're looking at supply chain management, continuity of operations. You have a fire in one part of a refinery. How does that affect the rest of the refinery? Do you have to shut everything down? What's the chain reaction? Can we meet our obligations? Do we rearrange supply chain so now it's going to come from a different location so we can meet our commitments? All of those things are managed by the crisis management team because the incident management team are focused on putting out the fire. That's what they do. And then the crisis management team focuses on all of those things, the domino effect, right, that comes afterwards. It's happening at the same time, but it's not what the incident management team deals with.
And then you talked about governments, and they are also involved in this. So how do they find that? Is there a difference between how people who actually work in different governmental run organizations, how they react to becoming part of an exercise? Or are they all cheering, saying, yes, I want to do this? Or I don't know.
Well, it's evolving. In the United States, the governments are obligated to be a part of it. So whether they want to or not, that is their job. They have to do it. And they've been doing it for so long that it's a matter of routine. They're okay with it, right? And then some areas are more have done more exercises than other parts of the country. It all depends on where in the country you are. But the common thread is that all of them will participate, and it's actually mandated by a presidential directive after 9/11 that the entire country will use incident command system in something happening to make sure we have a common language, right? And I'm not saying common language as in English, but common language as in the response world. The police used to use the 10 codes. You hear that going, oh, 10-4 means I understand or I got it. Well, if you didn't happen to know what all these 10 codes mean, you're like, oh, what does that mean? We don't want that because it slows down a response. Perfect example other than the 10 codes was the term bus. When you say bus to me, I think a bus, something you put a lot of people in. But in certain emergency, like ambulance services, instead of saying ambulance, they call it a bus. So if the people on scene are saying, yeah, we need a bus, send us a bus, and they need a bus to evacuate 50 people, and then one ambulance shows up, well, we have a problem. Or vice versa, if they actually get a bus, but they needed an ambulance. So you can see how that affects the response, the quality of the response. So now all emergency response in the United States uses ICS. It's a common terminology, and it resolves these problems. Now, globally, there's no global system, but globally, ICS has evolved into something called IMS, which is Incident Management System. It's essentially the same thing. Just it's a difference of a letter, an I versus a C. But how you do things are almost identical. And it does involve the government in part of being in charge of the incident. So you asked how do different governments react? And, if they have, if we're in a country that has never had to do this before, of course they approach with caution, right? Because they don't know what the system is. So the first time they're involved, they may choose to be observers, but they will be a part of it and watch and see what's happening, but they're not interacting with the response so much. They may be available for people to ask questions, but they haven't committed to being full bore, I'm in, And then when you come back to that country a few years later, they're like, oh yeah, we've done this, and we'll give a little bit of training, refresher training to everybody that's involved, and then they jump in. And so that is what we have found when we have gone to countries. Initially, they often watch and learn unless they have any kind of experience. And then after that, the next time we come back, they are more than willing to jump in. But the critical part is to always have them involved in the planning and the building of this event, right? Because they're stakeholders, they're partners in the process. They don't work for us. Essentially, we work for them because we pretend to be the people that had the spill or the incident. And we need to understand, what does the government in that country expect from us?
Mm.
We can't come in there and say, well, this is where we're going to do it. No, they tell us, the government tells us, in this country, these are the rules, and this is what we expect you to do. And then we have to adjust to fit in, to be in compliance.
In a way, they might be happy that they haven't had a spill. This is just an exercise.
Oh, yeah. I've never had anybody say, oh, I wish this was a real spill.
No. I understand that, but I mean, we see enough of spills, I think, but in a way, it's always better to be prepared and to exercise on beforehand.
Absolutely. And that's the most valuable part of these exercises. And that's what's been a challenge now during the pandemic. When we do these exercises before the pandemic, it was face to face. You had a chance to establish those relationships with people and kind of, understand how they work and learn the personalities of the people involved. And you establish a really effective relationship with them just by working with them side by side for, 2-3 days. Or in the planning process leading up to the event. But now everything is more challenging because you don't have that downtime, the social time where you grab a cup of coffee together and you get to know each other and get a better understanding of each other. We're missing that. And it's a critical component in building effective relationships. The virtual is good, but it's not as good. It has certain benefits but it will never be a equal replacement of the face-to-face interaction of people.
But your job must have changed a bit. I mean, if you've been in this industry for 25 years, I mean, I'm thinking digitalization. That is where I'm I'm the nerd on that one. And I'm thinking that must be helping you in your job.
It is. And actually, if you have to find a silver lining of the pandemic, there actually has been some. There are some things that we have learned because we were forced to. We do this globally. We have no country has enough people to deal with a massive incident, right? And I'm saying massive, like a deep water or a huge oil spill of, a really big event. There's not a single country that has enough resources within that country to deal with that completely independently. I mean, when Deepwater happened, that was such an event that you can't even compare that to anything else. And a country as large as the United States, with all the resources, they didn't have enough. They were importing resources from Europe, both people and equipment, and from other parts of the world, not just Europe. But it just goes to show that everybody needs help from their neighbors at some point, right? But then you add the whole thing of time and distance. So equipment going from point A to point B is going to take as long as it takes. Digitalization will not help with that. Transit is transit. You can't beam me up. You can't do the Star Trek thing and beam things. It'd be nice if we could.
Not yet.
Not yet. I'm sure somebody's working on it. But for personnel and expertise, you can bring them into the response much quicker now because of the digitalization and because we have the ability to go on camera and we can send videos and we can send pictures, and we're using a lot of Microsoft Teams, but Zoom and other platforms, whichever one works best for that particular situation. So you can bring the expertise into the situation immediately. It's a phone call. It's a video conference. You don't have to wait for them to get on an airplane and fly halfway around the world and show up and be sleep deprived and jet lagged. They're here on the phone. You can get them. And, now we're building these virtual rooms where we are working together and we're sharing our computer screens. It's not exactly like sitting at the same table, but it's really close. And so that has been something that we are, in the past, when we have wanted to test, well, how would you feel about having this particular part support remotely? People have been very hesitant. They're like, I don't know about that. No, for this exercise, we want everybody here. Well, now they haven't had a choice. They have to support remotely because nobody's allowed to travel. So we have now had the opportunity to test these things remotely. And we have found that in certain instances, there are some things that might actually be more effective if they are allowed to stay at their home base rather than packing up and traveling, because they have the resources they need. They have certain very complicated, like naval architects, they have an incredible suite of software loaded on their computers that are in their offices, and they have blueprints and they have whatever else they need to do their job. Well, if they have to pack all of that up and travel to a location, they lose some effectiveness. Legal departments, they find that they can do a lot from their home bases, that they don't necessarily need to be there in person. We have found that, you can almost develop like two teams, right? You take with similar expertise, and if something happens, you get one team on a plane right away and they go, right? Pandemic allowing, and even post-pandemic, you get somebody mobilized right away and off they go to a physical command post wherever the incident has happened. But at the same time, while that team is in transit, you have another team of equal expertise that are supporting the incident already, but remotely. And then they can start relieving each other. The other thing is, these things happen they have to go 24/7, right? It's not like you say, well, now we stop for the day and I know the oil is still spilling, but we're going home now. That's obviously not an option. So you have this ability to follow the global clock. So you can work with people's natural biorhythms. If you say you do 8-hour shift reliefs or even 10, it's not unusual for somebody to work a 10-hour day. You can do that without feeling incredibly fatigued. So what we could do is we could take advantage of these biorhythms. So if the incident happens in Asia, the initial response team works in Asia, but then the rest of the world starts waking up in a different time zone, and they can come in and start relieving the team in Asia that has now been working all through their natural day to allow them to sleep in their natural sleep patterns. And it reduces that fatigue factor, and the consequence, especially for the long-term response, you minimize illnesses associated with biorhythms and the impact on biorhythms. So you have the opportunity to potentially minimize those. We of course, don't have any scientific fact or proof of that yet, but it's just something we're looking at as a potential, that it could be a benefit.
Sounds like the new buzzword in tech, which is digital twins. Sounds like the same thing, same sort of.
Yeah.
And you can also test things in one team, which might be the remote team, to see if something could be done differently whilst they are doing the actual hands-on. A lot of things you could develop on that one. But what about the simulators? When did they come into play?
Usually when we do the exercises, because we want to focus on managing the incident, not preventing the incident, right? We come in when all levels of prevention have failed. It has happened, and there's nothing you can't undo it. It has happened. Now you have to deal with it. So we don't use simulators in that sense, but what we do use simulators when it comes to doing, as far as mapping out where the oil is going. If it's on the water, there's a lot of sophisticated software that can map a trajectory of where oil is going, and it is what you would use if there was an actual spill. You would be using the software. You would say, well, the oil started at this point. We're guessing about this much. And then you apply all of your environmental parameters, your weather, your currents, whatever else is impacting how the oil is moving. So that we do use to be able to give the players, a realistic view. But one thing we do that they can't do is we jokingly refer to it as we're breaking the laws of physics. Because, like I said, I get paid to create mayhem, and I also get to break the laws of physics. Sometimes, when you build an exercise, you always have a focus, right? And if you happen to be, so you can take things out of play. You say, well, we don't want to deal with media in this. We want to focus specifically on this operation. So we don't want to deal with having to keep the media informed or doing press conferences. We can artificially just say, okay, media is out of play, and we won't play that portion. In an actual event, you don't have the luxury of taking things out of play. Everything's in play. You have to deal with whatever gets thrown at you. But in an exercise, I can choose, if the team wants to do that, we take it out. And it's just a stated artificiality. You have to manage expectations. So we don't want people to think that, oh, wow, the media didn't discover this massive oil spill. Aren't we lucky? So we have to say that up front. We're not playing media. But what we do is also, a lot of times we are working near borders, right? Like you're moving borders between countries. For example, if we're playing in the Baltic Sea, and let's say only one country wants to play, well, I can't have the oil go to these other countries if they are not involved in the exercise. So we artificially break the laws of physics to make the oil stay within the parameters that we want it to stay. And then we say that at the beginning. We say, okay, in an actual event, the oil would go much further than we are showing you, but this is what we're doing. So just don't question the scenario. Don't question the data is the number one rule, because these responders are good at what they do. So if they look at the oil staying there, never moving, or not going where they know it would go, they would question it because they're good at what they do. So we have to stay that, like, yes, we are aware this doesn't look real, but this is your reality right now.
So maybe you could do that in the real world. Change the borders and get all the crews that are stuck on their ships to travel back home, like in the old days.
Oh, wouldn't that be nice? Yeah. No, we don't have the ability to affect reality, the real laws of physics, just the ones in our exercise world.
So how do you see the future? How will this develop?
Well, I think, we have now seen there's been a huge change in how people work. We have found everybody scrambled in the beginning to set up their home offices. They took over their dining rooms or grabbed a closet and built an office. People were very creative, and they did it. I'm impressed. I had the benefit of, I already had a home office, because when I'm not traveling, I work out of my office. My son's former bedroom is now my office. And so I was very lucky in that sense. But other people, they got scrambled. Companies started buying resources and sending it to people's homes so they could get going. But I do think that I don't think we will ever go back to exactly the way it was before, with everybody back in an office. I think people have found a nice work-life balance now when they have the ability to work. They get the job done, but they may not get it done at traditional hours. People may not necessarily work 9 to 5. Some people may say, well, I could take my kids to school, or we have something going on in the afternoon, and they work around those hours. They don't have the ability to do that in an office. And I just read an article the other day. I can't remember where it was, but they were saying that 40% of the workforce, and that's probably here in the United States. I don't think that was a global workforce, but 40% of the US workforce has said they have no interest in going back to the way things were, as far as forcing them back into their office, because they have found they get the job done, their bosses know they're getting the job done, and their families are happier. So why would we force people back? But for what we're doing, I think we will find that we will always have some sort of a hybrid now. We are not going to go to 100% face-to-face. I think we will always have some virtual support, because we have found that it can really benefit us and make us more effective.
Why did you become involved in oil spill? I mean, I know you as someone who is taking command and doing things and all of that. And have you always been like that?
Maybe you shouldn't ask me. Maybe you should ask my husband. But probably. I like doing things. And because I grew up by the ocean, I've had an incredible love for the ocean my entire life. I grew up on the west coast of Sweden. I can see the ocean from our house that we still have there. And the thought of that being ruined would break my heart. So if I could do something to make that not happen, that's great. If I can't prevent it, I want to be in a position where I could at least help minimize the impact and get the cleanup done well. So I think it's a personal, I just love the marine environment, always have. And I want my children, and if I ever get grandchildren, I want them to be able to enjoy it. Once it's dead, it's dead. You can't bring it back. So I'd like to protect it. It turned out to be just one of those things. I kind of fell into the Coast Guard. It was a very strange conversation. And I would say that a bad day at work led me to say, oh, yeah, let's look at the Coast Guard stuff. But that's actually what happened. It is, my sister was in the Air Force, and she goes, oh, you should join the Air Force. And I'm like, Air Force, that's like desert and mountains. And no, I need to be on the water. And I went to see a recruiter for the Navy, and they sent me, but the testing that I had to do happened to be at a Coast Guard office. It was a Marine Safety Office in Baltimore, Maryland. And there's a friendly rivalry, I would say, between the Navy and the Coast Guard. Right? They're both seagoing services. And the Coast Guard, of course, are like, why would you want to join the Navy? You don't want to join the Navy. You want to join the Coast Guard. And I was joking with them. I said, okay, convince me. Why would I want to join the Coast Guard? And they gave me some pamphlets, and I went in and I took my test and blah, 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 blah. And then one day at my job that I had at the time, which was research and was not fulfilling for me, I just had a really bad day. And I came home and asked my then, fiance at that point. I said, where did I put that Coast Guard stuff? Do you remember those Coast Guard pamphlets? And I found them, and I called the number, and I went in to talk to them about it. And they showed me, back in the day, a videotape of the Coast Guard missions, of the different missions. And one of those was the Marine Environmental Protection mission. And I said, that's it. That's what I want to do. Oh my God, that's perfect. Sign me up. And they said, well, it's not quite that easy. You actually have to apply. And then I went through the whole process, and so it began. And it's been, or it was, it's over now, but it's, I still work with the Coast Guard, and it was great. I loved it. I got to sail a tall ship as part of my training. I mean, how fantastic is that?
But we are not that good in recruiting, are we? We haven't really developed that, have we?
I don't know why people choose the jobs they do in the shipping. I mean, I'm almost embarrassed to say that I fell into my Coast Guard job, but it was just like the perfect thing. And I was really lucky that I literally fell into that. It was the perfect job for me. But I think from what I can tell, the marine industry, shipping, it's very much a family thing. You do it because your dad did it. Sometimes you do it because your mother did it, but more likely because your dad did it. And you become a seagoing family, so to speak. And if you're not in that, how do you find shipping as a career? I don't know. That honestly, shipping as a career was never something I even considered. It was never put in front of me as, what do you think of this option? And it can be so rewarding. And I don't know the answer to it. I don't know how to increase, but I do think that organizations like you and I are both members of WISTA. I think there's a lot that could be done with that. And I think here in Seattle now, or it's in the Seattle area, but they have a maritime high school focus on maritime. And I think that's fantastic. But again, you wouldn't go to a maritime high school if you didn't already have an interest in maritime, right? So are you going to take a kid from a farm somewhere in the eastern part of Washington and have them say, I want to go to the maritime high school? We need to get into the middle of the country, into the dry parts, and not just of the United States, the dry parts of other countries too, not just the coastal communities, to show, what the potential is. And then it all depends on, if you're willing to make the sacrifices that, what the mariners are going through now, it's going to be, I think, very hard to convince people to go into maritime. You're stuck in a ship for 4 years and you're not allowed to see your family. You're essentially held a prisoner. The ships that are stranded and the crews have been abandoned, that shouldn't happen. We rely on maritime and shipping. Our global economy hinges on it. So they should be treated as extremely valuable people. And unfortunately, they're not. And I think that is going to make it really hard to recruit people to join now.
I totally agree. But there are so many different things you can do in the maritime industry.
Yeah.
We know so many people between us that have wonderful different jobs and they do things you never could imagine.
Yeah. There's a lot to do in the supporting of the maritime industry, right? So I felt kind of strange joining WISTA actually, because it says women in shipping and trade. I'm like, well, I'm not in shipping and I'm not in trade. I'm in the Coast Guard. I'm in the regulatory portion, military portion, and it just happens to be regulatory here in the United States, but it's not shipping and trade. But what I do for the Coast Guard ensures that shipping and trade can continue, right? Keep the environment clean so the ships can go through. We keep them safe so they don't sink. We do a lot of things in support of shipping and trade. So yes, you did insurance. There's so many things that you can do to support good shipping. You don't actually have to be on the ship itself. But we need people to go on the ship itself. Otherwise, nothing happens.
Did you have a role model growing up?
In the shipping world? In the maritime world? No, not really. I actually, growing up, I wanted to be a doctor. I wanted to go to medical school. I wanted to be a surgeon. Yeah. So how do you go from that to Coast Guard? Yeah. That's I know that's too complicated. But obviously my parents were my greatest role models. They never told me, you can't do that. My father had no sons. He had 2 daughters, or he has 2 daughters. He has 3 granddaughters and 1 grandson. And he never said, well, you're a girl, you should do this. Or you're a girl, you can't do this. My parents raised me completely to be completely independent, free thinker. At sometimes I think they probably regretted making me a free thinker. They would just wish I was a little bit more compliant. But, they had complete faith in us, and they never told us that they didn't think we could do something. If we said we wanted to do it, they were right there behind us, supporting us. Did they ever give us a reality check every so often? Absolutely. Or they say, well, have you considered this? But they never said, you can't do it. And that was, I think, great, because the world was my oyster. I could do whatever I wanted to do. And they encouraged us to try things. My parents traveled. And then, of course, moving to the US was a whole new life experience. And I know part of the reason for doing that was they felt that it would be a good experience for my sister and I to get to live as expats for a few years and experience something new. They never intended for it to be real forever, but it's okay. It's been really good. And so I think my parents, to answer your question, are definitely role models. And I've tried to raise my own children I said we, my husband does get some credit. We have tried to raise our children the same way. I told my kids, I don't want them to be lemmings. Don't do it because everybody else is doing it. I said, you are absolutely allowed to question authority, but you will do it with respect. And I have heard from teachers that both of them have exercised that privilege, but they have also exercised that privilege with respect. But I like it. They're free thinkers. And that's the way our parents raised us, and that's the way we raised our kids.
So how do you see, if we look at the maritime industry, where do you see it going? There's a lot of environmental talk in there right now.
Yeah, it's interesting. Some of the things I'm seeing now with all the wind power, I'm seeing these really modern hulls getting outfitted with sails. So that's a kind of a strange looking thing, but I love seeing it because it has the potential, to really impact our environment for the better. We've done a lot of damage over the years, and it'd be nice if we could at least slow down the pace of the damage, and in some cases, maybe even reverse some of it at some point. It's really interesting to see. I don't know any statistics about how effective, what kind of impact it's having yet, but I really like seeing it. I've also seen all these, the wind turbines, how they're now changing them from straight up and down to more parallel with the surface. And that could potentially have an impact on the bird kills, where you're saying such a large number of birds get killed in the wind farms. Maybe just changing the way they're situated can. And I've seen them painting the blades to make them more visible I love seeing this innovation, and shipping is definitely doing it with the reduction of the emissions and the things that they're talking about, the cleaner fuels and, the winds, the sails on the ships. I think it's great. I think we're doing the right thing.
It will be less oil spilled for you to manage.
And I will be more than happy for there to be less oil spills to manage. That's actually something we're saying. It's again, people are saying, "Oh, you're the only one that gets excited about this." But I'm like, my job to keep people comfortable and qualified in doing incident management gets more and more difficult with the fewer incidents we have, right? Because they don't have the opportunity to practice on a real event, which is great. One of my clients, he has this quote on his signature block, and I can't remember it exactly, but he says, our goal is to have the best trained, least experienced incident managers. And I'm like, that's exactly what it is. We try to maintain the readiness really high, but we hope we never need it.
Yeah.
But learning by trial of fire is certainly the most effective way of learning, but for the environment, not so good.
Thank you for taking the time to speak to me. Who do you think I should interview the next? Who would you be curious to listening to?
Oh, I was hoping you were going to ask me that. I actually thought about that. And there's a lady I have worked with for probably 7 or 8 years now, who I think you would really enjoy meeting. And her name is Ursula Doherty. And she has a background starting in shipping. She used to be selling as a chief officer on the very large crude carriers. And I believe she has also sailed chemical tankers. And then she's come ashore and has worked in insurance and continued to work in incident management and emergency response. So I think you'll enjoy meeting her.
I look forward to it already now, just when you told me about her. So I will really try and get her as a guest on my podcast. Thank you for taking the time to speak to me. Thank you, Agneta. I'm happy that you're working hard not to have too much work to do in the future. Your business line is super exciting, and I have some experience participating in emergency drills during my time as a hull underwriter. So I know that what you are doing makes a difference. This was a different episode from the previous ones. I hope you enjoyed it. Maybe Agneta inspired you to have a look at what the US Coast Guard can offer. However, if you're not looking to change your career, you may listen to this during your holiday. If you have the time to take a picture of yourself listening to the Shipping Podcast and show me what you do whilst listening, please send it to hello@shippingpodcast.com and I will include it in the newsletter. It's just for fun. Please humor me. I must go. I'm also enjoying a few days off. So, until the next time, from me to you, over and out. Thank you for listening to the Shipping Podcast. Don't forget to tell everyone that you meet that there is a Shipping Podcast available and that they should download it and listen to the maritime professionals who are sharing their passion for the shipping industry.